Hello, everyone. It's great to see you this afternoon. I see a few familiar faces from a couple earlier panels, so that's always great to see. My name is Amy Harder. I'm executive editor of Cipher News. We're a publication covering climate and energy technologies. We launched in September 2021, and I mention that only to say so much has changed in the energy and climate space since then, and that's usually not the case. For about 30 years, we had a lot of talk about doing things, and then suddenly we did everything. In the doldrums of August of last year, Congress and the Biden administration finally passed really big legislation that is seeking to move us away from fossil fuels. The US passed specifically a trifecta of laws led by the Inflation Reduction Act that, taken together, means that US federal spending on clean tech over the next decade will likely be 3.5 times higher than in recent levels and 15 times levels not seen in earlier decades. That's according to research from the nonprofit RMI. So we're really in a whole new world when it comes to clean energy spending. At the same time, as I think a few of us have heard in prior conversations, oil, natural gas, and coal, demand for those fossil fuels are at record highs. So we're really in this world where I'm having a lot of cognitive dissonance. I don't know about you, but it's hard to sort of understand that on the one hand, we're making a lot of progress toward clean energy, and on the other hand, we're seeing the value and the importance of fossil fuels, despite their role in heating up the planet. So we're here to unpack all of that and what it means for businesses and trying to do sustainable activities in a way that can also fit in with the bottom line. And so today, to have this conversation, I have with me today Michael Kohler, Deloitte tax leader. To his immediate left is Kristen Siemen, Chief Sustainability Officer at General Motors. And at the end, we have Heather Boushey, Chair of President Biden's Invest in America cabinet. And Heather, I want to start with you. Cost estimates of the Inflation Reduction Act, initially $369 billion over 10 years. Now we're seeing that the ultimate cost of that law could actually be quite larger than that. To proponents of the law, that's a good sign. It shows that the law is really popular. To critics, it's a sign that it's unchecked government spending. What's your response to that?
Well, a couple of things. So for decades, we've been talking about doing something on climate change. And one of the hardest things about dealing with climate change is that our whole economy depends on energy. And so it's a non-trivial matter to change the way that you produce and use energy all across your economy. So, the Biden administration took a different tack than what I'm an economist, so what economists had been arguing for decades is that we should make fossil fuels more expensive, and then industry would put in little brackets, magically produce all the new technologies as quickly as we wanted so that there would be this easy transition from the world we're in now to this new world. And instead, we said, actually, what we want to do is make sure that all of those businesses that we need to create clean energy actually have what they need to produce it. So right now, clean energy either doesn't exist or it's too expensive, and we are investing on both the supply and the demand side to make this happen. And I think what we're seeing with the estimates on the true cost of this is that because we're using market mechanisms, we're not these aren't government-built factories, we're not making the investments directly, we're putting a demand signal out there, and we're providing support for people that want to offer supply. And what I see is that the world is saying, oh my God, we have been waiting for you. We are so ready to make those investments. We are so ready to take up that demand that it is far bigger than our models anticipated. And remember, all this is based on modeling. So we can talk about that if you want in more detail. But it signals that people had been waiting for that strong signal where we were going with our economy. For too long, everybody knew that eventually we might do something about climate change. We made the decision, and now capital and consumers are saying, oh, okay, great, now I'm gonna act. And I'll just add one thing to that. Pre-pandemic, the economics community was talking a lot about this idea of secular stagnation, which is a fancy word for too much savings in the economy, not enough investment. And I mean, that's another sort of undercurrent here. A lot of businesses were sitting on a lot of capital, on a lot of cash. We'd seen a decline in investment relative to profits in the decades, in recent decades pre-pandemic. So again, that really strong signal that the administration has sent that we are on a new path capital had the resources to step up, and that's why we're seeing. That's why we're seeing 474 by last count $1 billion worth of investment, private investment across the country in not just clean energy, but also including semiconductors.
I want to come back to some of what you said about the role of the private sector in a few minutes, but Michael, I want to turn to you. In the last conversation I moderated with Julio Friedman to sort of level set us on the climate debate, he said that we're tackling climate change through taxes. And so people like you are incredibly even more relevant than you were before, which is so amazing that we have you on the panel, because taxes is, for better or worse, how we're tackling this. So can you give us sort of an inside scoop on how has your life changed at Deloitte covering taxes since the IRA and infrastructure law passed? And how do you see the potential upsides, but also unintended consequences of a law this large?
Well, you've asked a lot of hard questions. So the easy one is, how has my life changed? It's gotten a little bit busier, but it's all very, very exciting. At Deloitte, we're sort of driven by the conviction that climate and social change bring opportunities for growth, healthier communities and more prosperous communities. And so we see the IRA, which has got to be arguably the largest investment in sustainability in the United States history, as a tremendous plus for the economy. It's an investment, obviously. It's a collective social investment. And it's an enormously diverse piece of legislation. We won't do it justice in this hour because it is so diverse and so large and encompassing. Approximately 2/3 of the incentives provided in the IRA go towards tax credits, absolutely, as you say. And tax credits are one of the principal ways that, as you've said, a signal has been sent to the economy. But the other 1/3 is in the form of new grants, new programs, expansion of existing programs, and other kinds of direct investments. But it's investment, so what are the potential downsides? It's a bad investment. But it's probably not a bad investment, in part simply because we know, for instance, the Brookings Institute estimated the cost for the power sector of carbon abatement given in light of the IRA. And the cost is effectively about $83 of tax credits that go to the power sector in order to abate 1 metric ton of carbon. Well, the social cost of 1 metric ton of carbon emissions is estimated at a number that is much, much higher than that. So collectively, it's a good investment.
Because of the impacts of a warming world.
Because of the impact of a warming world. But on an individual firm basis, a basis of the businesses, the philanthropists, the community leaders, the individuals that make up our economy, it also provides investment opportunities as well. So the panel is called What's the Business Case for Sustainability? The IRS creates a very, very strong business case for sustainable investments domestically in the United States. I mean, and what do you do? What are people going to do in order to take advantage of it? Depends on the person. First, you have to educate yourself about it, but your perspective matters. So a business with an existing fleet of vehicles, they will electrify that fleet and claim a tax credit for that fleet. A community organization might decide to apply for a grant and build a community photovoltaic facility to supply power just to the community. An Indian tribe might apply for a loan, and combined with a new tax incentive that's available for wind power, they might be able to create a utility scale wind generation facility on tribal lands that'll provide jobs for tribal members and allow them to sell power for the next 30 years. Many individuals might buy an EV, a used EV, and claim an increased refund on their federal tax return as a way to finance that EV. There are an entrepreneur will try to line up capital to build a huge solar facility and maybe a wind facility in the middle of the desert and designate that power solely to the creation of clean hydrogen, which is a very, very valuable commodity and can be used for many different purposes. And so, that's a kind of greenfield opportunity, business opportunity. But many, many different sectors of the economy, and will have different perspectives and have different actions.
Kristen, if we've heard from the people who helped create the laws, and we've just heard from somebody who's consulting and providing a ton of important advice on the law, but you are actually on the ground implementing the law. So would love to get your just brief reactions to what you've heard so far, and how are you experiencing it as an executive at a company, being affected by it?
Sure. So thanks. I mean, certainly it's an exciting time, right? It is a great opportunity for our country. And for our industry. And GM had set some big, bold goals back in 2021 around our carbon neutral plans by 2040 and our plan to eliminate tailpipe emissions from new U.S. light-duty vehicles by 2035. And so we were well on the path before the IRA was passed. We have joint ventures for 4 battery assembly plants here in the U.S. that we have already, in fact, one's in production, one will start this year. One more next year, and then the 4th one we just announced within a few years after that. So even before the benefits of the IRA, we were certainly focused on U.S. manufacturing and U.S. jobs. We were talking before the panel started about our commitment around our facilities that we have today and our plan to transition those to the future for electrification. The communities where we live and work are really important to us. Our job forces are, important to us as well. In fact, there's a statistic out there that says for every job that GM creates or maintains, it impacts another 6 jobs in the U.S. And so we really have a huge impact across the country, and so these benefits, whether it be, the tax incentives around purchasing an EV or the manufacturing benefits with tax incentives or R&D incentives. For us, it's really about accelerating the transition to an all-electric future. So we're completely committed and really believe if you look at our carbon footprint, over 75% of GM's carbon footprint is the customer usage of our vehicles. So in order for us to address that, it is all about electrification, and then also the decarbonization of the grid to be able to charge those with green energy. The next biggest chunk being our supply base, which we're also focused on, and then our own facilities as well.
And if you want to hear more about GM strategy, the CEO of GM is speaking tomorrow during lunchtime, so be sure to check that out. A quick audience question, which I asked in my last panel, so if you were there, you're going to get it twice. Raise your hand if you are thinking about or have already taken advantage of some part of the IRA tax credits. See, it's lower than you think, so would love to just get a quick lightning round reaction to that. Heather, don't you think that should be higher by now?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, but
so what are
I'm
you
also
guys doing that you're not getting more people?
Well, so here's the thing. So first off, if you want to, so first off, the rules on how to, who's actually going to be eligible, what things are going to be eligible, those are all still coming down the pipeline, certainly for businesses, right? So there's confusion, right? This is all new. It's been so much work for the Treasury Department and my colleagues over there who are, working day and night to make these rules. So that's one issue, is that you can't educate people until you actually have clarity. I think the second thing is that a lot of them don't take, if you buy an EV this year, you're not going to get that money back until you file your taxes next year, and people may be waiting and all of those issues. But, and certainly there's all the home improvement stuff and starting to get the message out. We are doing a lot to try to educate people about it. We're actually about to tomorrow starting our second Invest in America tour, where cabinet level officials are going all across the country to talk to different communities and to talk about different pieces. But Mike is right in that the legislation is so big and broad that on some of it we kind of can't talk about it enough and help people understand it enough. But I think the nut of it is helping people understand that we understand that making the transition to clean is going to cost money, and in almost anything that you want to do, there is probably a way that the government is going to try to help you do that. And so on some level, I think communicating that opportunity, maybe that won't be true for everything, but like starting there and then seeing whether or not what you want to do qualifies is probably easier than actually looking at the long list of things that we are actually doing.
Kristen, what have you heard about the consumer interest and demand for electric cars? On the one hand, not a lot of hands went up here, but on the other hand, I've heard that there's already so much demand for electric cars that critics could say, why do we even need a tax credit when we have so much demand already?
Yeah, I mean, the demand is huge. In fact, it's exciting to see the transition happen so quickly. A lot about that is about the product and us being able to accelerate and produce as quickly as the demand is out there. And there are still, opportunities for, battery technology and battery raw materials. And we've done a lot to, again, bring that domestically as well. In fact, we've sourced all of the battery raw materials we need for our commitment for 2025 of 1 million vehicles. But there's still lots more to come after that. And so the incentives and being able to partner with our suppliers to be able to produce a resilient, a sustainable supply chain and to really focus on doing that, here in North America, I think is really important. And to be able to then offer those technology advances to the customers. I mean, if you look at our portfolio of vehicles that's coming out in the next year even, a lot of people only have one vehicle, and they use that vehicle for their family, for oftentimes their livelihood. So, to be able to transition to an EV, they need an EV that meets the needs of their family as well. So whether it's the Chevy Equinox that's coming out, which will start at around $30,000, or the Silverado EV, to be able to transition into a full-size pickup truck, which has been certified at 450 miles of range, so super exciting to see that come as well. So those will be the solution sets for people that didn't see themselves in an EV today.
Because most people who have electric cars have two cars.
Exactly.
Gas and electric.
We should observe about the IRA, there's something that maybe is implicit in our conversation. The IRA is heavily geared towards providing greater incentives for investments in the United States, to say quite broadly. So it's one of its purposes is clearly to grow the capital and human capital base for a clean energy economy within the United States. And so when we speak about investments and your investments in plants, that's in fact driven in part by the tax code and in part by many other decisions, obviously, but it's influenced by the IRA. It's an important element of that.
I want to just ask a very big picture question that I think might be a more devil's advocate question here, which is, we're pouring billions and billions of dollars into clean energy tax credits to help move us to clean energy. We've seen over the history of the wind and solar tax credits that when the tax credits go away, demand and implementation of these and installations of these energy technologies go down. Are we supposed to expect that we're just going to subsidize our way out of climate change? Because if that's going to be the case, that's going to be extremely expensive. So my question is, when would we reach a point where we don't have to subsidize some of these technologies?
Let me take a first stab at that. So first, let's start by remembering that we actually heavily subsidize fossil fuels. Because as it turns out, energy is important to everything we do, right? We're using little microphones that are using energy. We're being recorded. We have lights, right? We got here in vehicles, everything, right? And we know that one of the most important drivers of cost increases and inflation has to do with energy price spikes. And so we actually spend a lot of government resources making sure that we have access to secure, stable, affordable fossil fuels. Now, that's a problem for the climate. And so as we are looking to clean energy, we should be sort of calibrating in the same way, that we need to make sure that we have access to safe, affordable, stable, clean energy in the same way. So the question about how long you need to do subsidies is a really good one. As an economist, I'm very concerned about that. I think on the plus side, the tax credits that we put in place now last for 10 years. That's sending a strong demand signal over a long period of time. We'll see where we are when we get to the end of that period. But we do need to make sure that as we're doing this, we're doing just like we did for fossil fuels. We're going to have to secure all the things across the supply chain. I'm sure we'll get to talking about critical minerals and all of that. But the federal government will remain heavily involved in energy moving forward because it's so important to our economy, to our success as a country, to our national security. So that's one answer. The second thing I would say is that so that's one thing. The second is that we are investing along the innovation to commercialization pipeline because we understand that you can't just invest in the R&D. you have to make sure that all of that gets to commercial scale as quickly as possible. And so we have different programs. I've had slides here. I could show you all the different programs and how they're across all these different aspects of the innovation to commercialization pipeline. And so some of those may not be as necessary over time, but the whole point is that we have these learning curves that we will be able, through the process of investment and competition, drive down costs so they can be more competitive. And while I think that what happened in the past is a good case study, there's also the larger infrastructure that we have to build out that makes it easier for people to all use the clean energy. EVs, the classic network failure. Well, you can't buy an EV unless there's a charging network. There's economic analysis that actually says that if we'd only done the EV charging network, that could have taken us a significant way on adoption of EVs, because for most consumers, the problem was range anxiety, and that's about whether or not there's a charging system. So we're also making those investments. So in terms of the cost curves, you look across all these different technologies, you have to create the ecosystems for the whole clean energy infrastructure across all these different groups, and then we'll start to see those costs fall. But yeah.
Michael, would love to push that question to you. How do you think, as a tax expert, you'd probably be great for you from a business perspective to always have tax credits supporting clean energy, but how do you view, ultimately, do you think these tax credits need to go away? Is that what's best for both businesses and consumers?
That's really a question for an economist.
We have one.
And I'd have to push it right back to Heather. I don't know how long they should last from a public policy perspective. I really don't. It is the case that historically the United States has chosen the path of the carrot and not the stick when it comes to sustainability investments. Because yes, obviously we all know that we've toyed legislatively with cap and trade and various other means to provide sticks, but essentially the IRA provides carrots. And I mentioned before that the carrots get bigger, significantly bigger, and significantly bigger over time as components, as labor requirements are met, and certain industrial policy goals are met, and things happen in North America or in the United States proper. All of those incentives are just in the tax code. They are clearly driving us to make certain decisions, but what's the right time to dial them back? I just do not know.
I want to talk about two related trends that the IRA has ushered in, particularly in the US, but that have had global repercussions. The first is prioritizing domestic production of everything from batteries to mining of critical minerals and all the impacts of that. And then the parallel challenge with ensuring strong labor rights and prevailing wages. Kristen, I want to first direct this question to you. GM's been impacted by both of those requirements. Can you talk about how are those making it harder for you to implement the law and help take advantage of the tax credits?
Yeah, I wouldn't say harder. Actually, for us, it was almost maybe the icing on the cake, as we already had 3 plants announced, battery assembly plants with our partners, our JV partners, before the IRA was passed. So, our plan to really focus on North America and a resilient, sustainable supply chain. Also, our assembly plants and our parts facilities, our current workforce is, our future workforce. And so we're very focused on making that transition and transformation within the communities where we are today. Even our supply base, we have a ESG pledge that we issued about 1.5 years ago that asks our suppliers to sign on for their own carbon neutral goals, as well as a commitment around human rights and labor practices as well. We measure it by a score on EcoVadis, but really the goal is to get our supply chain to be right there with us. We know we can't do it by ourselves. The government, the private, the public partnership is extremely important, but our supply base is huge. We have over 20,000 or more suppliers, and so for us to be able to get down into the tier 2, 3, 4, and understand what's happening all along that supply chain, we'll never be able to do it 100%. Now we're making lots of partnership announcements into various stages along the critical supply chain of batteries and the critical materials there. But the entire supply chain is important. And so by doing this, we're seeing those practices and those commitments transition all the way down. We've had over 70% of our APV already commit to the goals. And what's really exciting is we're seeing our tier 1 suppliers start holding and training their tier 2, their tier 3, tier 4 suppliers. In fact, we had a conference last week where we brought in a group of suppliers to teach them how to do their own sustainability councils. And so it's really just perpetuating those beliefs, the commitments, and the practices throughout the entire chain.
Heather, I would like to hear from you to articulate why the administration has prioritized these two goals on strong labor rights and domestic production. And on that domestic production in particular, how are you trying, critics could say that it's just a drop in the bucket, whatever you do compared to what China's doing. How can you turn that tide to actually make a difference long term?
Well, the first answer is you have to start somewhere. You can't, so there's a couple of answers I want to give to this question. Let me start where you just ended with China, which is that, so we know that we need stable access to clean energy and to clean energy products. And we know that right now that China has spent decades making investments in securing that supply chain, in securing the different parts of the supply chain. One of the ways that, I'm an economist, so this resonates really for me, and I like to try it on audiences, but one of the ways that I really think about this is that OPEC controls 40% of crude oil supply, 40%. And we all have experienced over the past couple of years the effects of the spike in gas prices caused by the war in the Ukraine, right? We know that's what that's done to inflation, to costs. We know that the power that OPEC has over our economy, and they only control 40%. But China controls 80 to 90% of core parts of the clean energy supply chain, in solar, in critical minerals, and they have been working for decades, particularly on critical minerals, to secure access to those around the world. And they are mining them in a way that is not meeting probably anyone's level of labor or environmental standards. The mining of these is very toxic. There's very toxic things that are off-put from it. And so there's human and there's labor and environmental consequences for these new minerals that we're going to need for the clean energy economy. So when you ask about the domestic production, what we need to do is we need to create an industry that can match that market concentration. We want to create a new global system where we can unpack that, where we can create a new competitive environment with other allies and friendshoring, with other partners who are going to produce in a way that is consistent with our values. And we're front-loading that because it's important. It's important for our lives. It's important for our planet. So one of the reasons that we think that domestic content is so important, it's about jobs, but it's also about turning that tide. That's a big tide to turn. Where do you start? Well, let's say we're going to make some things domestically. We're going to start asking that question in a way that we haven't in a long time. We're never going to make everything here. It's not our goal. It's not what we've said we're going to do. But if you want to turn this tide, you have to start somewhere. And so making that commitment to the American people. Also, here's the thing. As we've been talking, this is taxpayer money. It's taxpayer money. It's your money. It's our money. And if we're going to spend, the president believes if you're going to spend the American people's money, you should spend it on things that benefit American communities, American workers, create good jobs, American industries, right? So that's one piece of it. So that's like on the batteries and the critical minerals. The other piece is, and let me also just note that in the laws, in all the laws we've done, there's various aspects of domestic content. One is these tax credits. These are bonuses. Right? You can make an EV and you don't have to produce anything domestically. You can still get some tax credits. That's great. You get more if you do it here, right? So that's
like an extra carrot instead of
a bigger carrot.
Yeah, it's a bigger carrot. Or maybe you get 2 or 3 carrots. But that's
I'm not a huge fan of carrots.
Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
Cakes or cookies.
Or maybe a cupcake. But it's an incentive. It's an incentive to push firms to do the right thing. But it's not a mandate. It's an incentive, and it's working because people like money. On the wage and on the
more than carrots.
Yeah, exactly. We all like carrots. But on the other side, on the wage and the prevailing wage and apprenticeship and good jobs, again, these are tied to the investments that we are making with taxpayer dollars. And we're saying if you do the right thing, if you pay a prevailing wage, if you have an apprentice program, if you invest in a low or moderate income community, if you invest in an energy community, you get more money. right? Because it's benefiting communities. And let me just, so that's important. This president, if he's, I mean, you know, and we own it, he said, when I hear climate, I think jobs. We have to create good jobs. That's probably, I think, the most important role of the president of the United States is making sure that the economy works. That means creating good jobs around the country. And then just to take one step back, and I would actually be curious, Kristen, what you think of this. This is, you know, what I'm taking from the econ literature, but you live this. Our understanding in economics from the industrial organization field is that it's not about one, we can't just support one little factory or one little piece of the supply chain. It's an ecosystem of firms. And so all of the worker protect, the wage and apprenticeships, the domestic content, these are all helping to create ecosystems of a variety of firms that can have a pipeline of talent that can get jobs at different manufacturers or different parts of the industry, because there's an industry. It isn't just one little business that you're supporting. And so part of the domestic content is creating those vibrant industries and getting that foothold. And making sure that we're giving firms that opportunity to thrive so that communities can thrive.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, the impact that, if you think about just an assembly plant or a parts plant in a local community and the impact it has on that entire ecosystem, and then you take that out across the country, it's huge. I mean, I gave the statistic, you know, one job is basically impacting another 6 jobs. And then you put our supply chain on top of that, and it really does just snowball. So it's super important.
An interesting aspect of the law we should mention is that while in the early stages the credits, the tax credits, are geared towards certain kinds of known technologies, over time, though, those known technologies credits sunset and move to what are kind of technology neutral. So effectively, they become indifferent to, for instance, in the generation of power, it's indifferent to how you generate clean power. You get the credit no matter how you generate clean power. You can, so it's not technology forcing in that sense. It's sort of whatever is the most economical technology to generate that clean power will, as it were, get the credit.
I'm so glad Mike is here because you know everything about the tax credits. It's so great.
In a few minutes, we were going to take questions from the audience, so please be thinking of things you'd like to ask the panelists. I want to go back to the role of the private sector. So I wrote a recent column with the headline, "The Wild and Wonky New World of Our Climate Debate," now that the IRA has passed. And for decades, it was really activists that were in the driver's seat. Bill McKibben, Greta Thunberg, they were calling for Congress to do something. And then suddenly, the US Congress has done something. And for better or worse, now corporations are in the driver's seat, quite literally with GM, but also just generally speaking. And so putting on another critical hat, maybe direct this question first to Kristen, but would love to hear definitely from Heather and perhaps you as well, Michael. I think some environmentalists are wary that corporations are supposed to save us from climate change.
Yeah, well, I hope not. I mean, you know, we don't be afraid of us for sure. You know, I mean, we live and work in these communities, so they're just as important to us as they are to everyone else. You know, I mean, again, we set these big goals back in 21, recognizing that climate change is real and it's urgent, and we need to do something to impact it. And the only way to impact that is to address what we can address and start there. And so it was about setting, you know, goals around the transition to an all EV future. You know, it was about investing in renewables. In fact, we announced last year that we had originally made a commitment around renewable energy to be 100% renewable by 2050. We then accelerated that a couple times, and last year we actually announced that we've sourced everything we need to be 100% renewable in the US by 25. So we accelerated that goal by 25 years. You know, as one of our employees said, we skipped a generation. Mm-hmm. You know, and so every commitment that we've made, we're looking at what we can do faster, what we can do better, because it is important. It impacts all of us.
Heather, how do you view the private sector? You know, Democrats are no strangers to the fact that corporations have been fighting climate legislation for a long time, and now you're trying to partner with them. Can you talk about how that has shifted?
Well, I think, you know, it's it's been hard to think of. So if you don't have a plan that helps businesses make the transition, of course they're going to oppose it, right? And of course we know from political science that if you have one set of stakeholders, the fossil fuel sector, that is going to is fearful of losing everything, and you're saying that you're just going to tax that, but you're not creating stakeholders that are invested in this in other parts of your society, then that's a very difficult political situation to be in. I think that from my perspective, as an economist, one of the things I think is just so important here is that we're trying to build trust between the people and the government, and between the people and the businesses in America that employ, that, as I almost say in almost every talk I give, the vast majority of Americans get the vast majority of their income from holding down a job. And yet, for nearly half a century, we have let down millions of Americans as inequality has widened, as too many people have been left behind, as wages have failed to keep pace with productivity. And this president has made a commitment to that and has said to businesses, if you come with us and create good jobs in communities and help us do the right thing and invest in communities that have been left behind, we'll give you more money, we will support you, we will partner with you. And that's the partnership that we are trying to forge. And it's so exciting, quite frankly, to see so many businesses stepping up and saying, oh yeah, actually we kind of wanted to do this all along. This is great, let's do this. But also, America remains one of the richest countries the world has ever seen. There's a lot of money, there's a lot of opportunity, and pushing that in a direction that benefits communities, workers, families, and still allows businesses to make money. And here's the thing. Looking out over the next 20 years, the countries across the world that are going to be the most competitive are the ones that win on clean energy. Full stop. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So we are trying to create a society where we can all benefit while, bringing along our, working, of course, in close partnership with our friends and allies abroad as well.
Would love to throw it out to the audience and have some questions. The lady in the red. And then there's a mic going around, so. And please direct your question to a specific panelist if it is for one person.
Thank you, Amy. And hi, Kristen. I'm Joan Michelson, Electric Ladies
nice
Podcast. I had her on my show, so you should go to Electric Ladies Podcast, put in Kristen Siemen, and you'll learn how they're doing their transition. So it's great to see you.
You
Hi,
too.
Heather. I feel like I'm home. I used to work at Deloitte, too. So. But my question is something that I really haven't heard anybody talk about in this panel or in any of the few that I've been in so far, and that is women. Justice 40 is not just for women, right? Justice 40 is for disadvantaged communities writ large. So if you could talk about, and women-owned businesses only get 1% of government funding, government contracts, even though there's a 5% set aside. So you talk about people having jobs, but there are a lot of women-owned businesses. There are a lot of women who want to be in this industry and who want to take advantage of these and who want these jobs. So can you talk about the impact economically? I know, Heather, you and I have talked about women in the past. It's one of your favorite topics. So take it away, Heather and Kristen, and obviously there's a tax roll for that as well.
You want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. I think that the president has been very clear, and the way that we are implementing really focusing on making sure that these jobs are available to everyone. It's certainly the crux of the apprenticeships and trying to get people in. A lot of the jobs that we are creating in the clean energy space, in the construction trades that are going to build all of this, and all this work, and in semiconductors, those jobs have traditionally been held by men. But we are making investments in other parts of our work, in industries that disproportionately employ women. So I won't say that, I think we can't say that we've been leaving women behind. It's certainly, this is a function of the fact that the labor market itself is highly segregated, and there's two ways to do that. One is to focus on making sure that all jobs are good jobs and that everyone has access to that, to the good quality job, and the other is to mix people up and say that women need to go into the jobs that have been traditionally held by men. I think we're working on both aspects. We certainly, one of the great sadnesses of mine over the past couple of years is that we did not get all the investments in the care industry. The president set out a series of strategically important industries, new technologies like semiconductors, clean energy, set out care. We were unable to get that across the finish line, but the president did put forth the biggest budget that any president has ever put forth to invest in those, and so that is at least a threshold that hopefully in the future we'll make good on. But also, We've taken steps through a historic executive order on care to improve jobs and opportunity for care businesses, which are vast. They're almost all owned by women and disproportionately women of color. And you're right, like supporting them in that community is really important. And I know there's other panels that are talking about that. So I mean, and at the same time, you know, we are very acutely aware that we need to make sure that these jobs we're creating, and I'm going to pass this over to you with this, the jobs we're creating in clean energy also go to women. I feel like, though, everybody I've met from GM has been a woman, so that's got to say something. It's got to say something.
Excellent. Well, yes, we have some incredible role models, and you know, certainly starting with Mary Barra, our CEO. But it is actually, I would say, a huge focus in the company and something that I've been involved in for many years. As you well know, my background is in engineering. I've been at General Motors for 29 years. 27 of those were in product development. So I basically spent my career in electrical engineering and many other engineering functions, but focused on electrical. So women in STEM has been an area that I've done a lot of work in for a long time. We had a program that we started at GM called Take Two, which was about bringing women back to the workforce who had left for, you know, 2 or more years for whatever reason, whether it was to follow a trailing spouse on a, you know, an ISP assignment, or took off to take care of parents or children or whatever, but to bring them back into the workforce because, you know, physics is still physics. We started it in engineering and then really widened it across the entire company, but it really is about giving the confidence, having the programs. We do a lot of work with mentoring internally, a lot of work externally. The big issue is, as you talked about too, is building a pipeline, starting with the universities, but even earlier than that. GM's corporate executive for the Society of Women Engineers as well. And a lot of it is focused on how do we get middle school students to still think that, you know, math and science are cool. And it's much better now than when I was growing up. But I think I'm actually very optimistic about it. I mean, our company is a great example.
Well, and can I just,
yeah, please.
Let me just add one thing. There's actually economic studies that show, some research, that having women like us, an economist, an engineer, show up at a middle school or a high school is, you can statistically show increases the probability that some of those girls will go on to believe that they can do that. So some of what we're doing with the clean energy and having leaders that say, hey, you can do this, is an important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and one last thing I would add to it is one of the things that I would say was a really pleasant surprise when we made our announcements back in 21 around going to carbon neutral, et cetera, was the interest we had from new hires and, you know, prospective employees that wanted to come work for a company that stood for things that they believed in. And so it's really been exciting to see the new talent that we've been able to grow because of that.
A couple more questions. The lady in the hat in the back, and then we'll go to you here in the front.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Dawn Legans. I'm the Chief of Strategy and Innovation at Planned Parenthood. Oh. I'm not going to ask you about Planned Parenthood, but I do have on my mind a lot governors and state legislatures, and I think what I was thinking about, Kristen, was, you know, what happens when belief and commitment, and so great to hear all that you all are doing and with your supply chain, run into the Texas legislature, right? And there was an article yesterday in the New York Times that was about how the legislature, they didn't get it passed, thank goodness, and I live in Texas, by the way. So, but they were trying to pass something that would add cost and regulation on changes to renewables, as well as have been talking about putting limits on new projects. So I was just curious about two things: how you all are kind of preparing and organizing your supply chain, and those who might be in Texas or whatever, to take on this conversation with the state government, who you rely on, and maybe the tax code and other things. And then just how do any of you all see it kind of coming to life, and how do we prevent it from being caught up as, you know, a woke thing that, you know, in the election, 24 election, really delays our progress?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. You know, first off, I'm not a public policy person, right? I'm an engineer and now working in sustainability space, but we are weaving sustainability into every aspect of our business. Our business goals are our sustainability goals. They're not separate. And this is an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity for value. And so, take the political opinions out of it. This is good business. And it's good business for us, and it's good business for our supply chain. Saving energy, saving water, eliminating waste, actually even our investments in renewable have all been very, very good financial decisions as well. And so we've got to keep finding those opportunities, finding those innovations that continue to make it good business decisions. And then there's no argument. So.
Well, and I will add to that we're creating jobs all across the country.
Yeah.
So let me just give you 2 quick examples. So Governor Kemp in Georgia, and I wrote this down, but he is pledging to make Georgia the, quote, electric mobility capital, end quote, of the country. He is so excited about all of the clean energy investments that are happening in his state that he's going around the state telling everybody about it. He also says he's still a little unclear about this whole climate thing, but what he really wants are the jobs. He wants the jobs. He wants the jobs, and that's really important. And I'll give you a second example. My in-laws are from Kentucky, and their family is from all over the South, Tennessee, Arkansas, and I was hanging out with about 10 of them, all over 65, disparate political views last year. And the conversation turned to the president's investments. And they started talking about the battery plant announcements that they knew were happening in their community. And it was chilling to me because I was watching this group of people. They all had kids and grandkids, and they were so excited about the opportunity that meant for their community, for their family, for the people at their church. And that is the power of what we have created here, and that is why we want to have the wage requirements and the apprenticeships, so that we know that we're creating those good jobs. But that's, I think, the way you get past all of the whatever, is you actually give people what they need. I don't know.
I would love to go to a question up here in the front row. Oh, you, and then we'll go front row.
Sorry. As I had my mic close to me. So my name is Didi Bertrand Farmer. I'm Haitian, and I live in Miami, Florida. I am in the public health arena, and I work in multiple countries in the region. So my question here, I'm aware that the conversation is particularly local, but I would like to bring an equity perspective here, because we all know that what we so-called developing countries are the most impacted by climate change, and then they are not the most pollutant countries as well. So how all of those strategies that you are talking about could be expanded and shared to the countries that are suffering the most?
I think that's a great question. Heather, would you want to?
Yeah, let me just take a quick stab at that. So one of the things that is most, there's a lot of important things, but one of the most important things in addressing climate change, and which we know is harming developing countries or countries that are more susceptible to climate damage and don't have the resources to deal with it, one of the most important things is making sure that these clean energy technologies are affordable and available. And so the way that we have talked about it in the White House is that we're making these investments. We're one of the richest countries in we have the resources. We can make these investments. We can bring down the cost of clean energy in doing so through that learning curve. Estimates are that in doing so, this is going to lower the cost of all of these products globally, because we'll have invented the technology, brought it to commercial scale. And I think then the question is, how are we sharing it? How is this being put out into the world so that developing countries all across the planet can make use of this technology? But we have to get over this hump. We have to get through this technology hurdle, and we have to get through it, quite frankly, to your point, as quickly as we can with the least amount of disruption to social life as possible. And so us doing this, I think, is putting us on to my mind, this is the best pathway. The best way to get us on that pathway is to make these investments and figure out how we get those technologies around the world once they're at scale and cheap.
And for folks who want to learn more about the pace of the transition, including the impact on developing countries, please go to a talk that I'll be doing Tuesday afternoon. Should be really interesting on that topic. We have time for one more question. This gentleman up here has been patient, and then we'll wrap up.
All right. Hello, my name is David. I'm from the Bezos Kohler Foundation. So I want to ask something about how you guys talked about R&D, research and development, specifically in the United States. And so I want to bring it up to developing countries such as India. I've heard geopolitical analysts such as Peter Zeihan once say that the best thing to ever happen to the climate was China getting out of coal and going into natural gas. And so I'm looking at, when you look at climate graphs and you look at all these things, you see that the developed nations don't really have as much impact on the environment as, say, the developing ones such as India. And India, I think, currently has the most amount of carbon emissions. So I just want to ask, how would you guys go about this? I understand y'all are talked about research and development, but how would you like provide infrastructure, or how would you help out this country?
That's great. Heather, if you want to tackle that.
Does anybody else want to take it? Okay. So I mean, I think it's a similar answer to before. I mean, I think we are, to add on to that, one of the things that we've been focused on is making sure that the multilateral development banks are focused on making investments that address climate and help countries make the investments in infrastructure and in other technologies that can help them move to clean energy. That's a big piece of the puzzle. So making sure that, you know, if you're making those investments, it is consistent with our climate goals. But you're right. I mean, we need to, the problem with climate change is global, and how different countries are, you know, their resources, their capacity to use different energy technologies is a core part of the problem. And I mean, I will state what I said before, that figuring out the technologies to get these to commercial scale as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible, that's one really important step along the pathway to helping every country make that transition as well. But every country is going to have to deal with their own, you know, challenges with their own embedded industries, and so working through those geopolitical challenges is the challenge for the next 20 years, maybe 10, 20.
In our final moments together, I want to do a concluding lightning round where I ask each of you to just say the first word that pops into your head with this word association. The first word is carbon tax. Heather, why don't you go first?
Yeah.
You're an economist. You must love the carbon tax.
Meh?
Meh? Okay, that's a word. That's good.
Debate.
That's the stick I was talking about. We don't choose that way. We've gone the way of incentives, essentially.
The next word association is fossil fuel subsidies. You can't choose the same word. It has to be a new one.
It's the same word. Diminishing.
Challenging.
Complicated.
And our final word association game is net zero by 2050.
Yes.
Optimistic.
Doable.
Yes.
Well, stay tuned for more of this conversation in our Tuesday panel. I want to thank you for our experts here on stage and everyone here in the room as well.
Thank you.